Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an editorial from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. This article deals with the Consumer Protection E-commerce rules of 2020 that was brought out by the Department of Consumer Affairs. See, 11 months ago, the Department of Consumer Affairs brought out these rules in order to regulate the e-commerce sector. The e-commerce sector has grown exponentially in the country over the last few years, and today it has become the primary mode of purchase for most of the citizens. So, along with this rapid growth in the e-commerce sector, the number of consumer complaints have also gone up. And in fact, on the National Consumer Helpline, the highest number of complaints registered are from the e-commerce sector. These complaints are related to cheating by e-commerce websites, commission of fraud, failure to deliver services, poor quality or substandard quality of the products that are delivered, etc. So, to deal with these complaints and to protect the rights of the Consumer Protection e-commerce rules was brought out last year by the Department of Consumer Affairs. Now, recently, just a couple of days ago, the department has proposed a fresh set of amendments to these rules, and this editorial evaluates these proposed amendments. So first, let's talk about the amendments that have been proposed by the department to the e-commerce rules of 2020. See, as per this press release from the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, the government is looking to prevent unfair trade practices in the e-commerce sector by bringing out the Consumer Protection e-commerce rules 2020. After these rules came into effect in 2020, over the last 1 year, the government has received several complaints and suggestions from consumers, traders, and industry associations regarding widespread cheating and unfair trade practices being followed by some of the e-commerce platforms. So, the continuing occurrence of these incidents highlighted the shortcomings of the e-commerce rules of 2020, and this has pushed the ministry to come out with a fresh set of amendments in order to plug these gaps. Because the government has agreed with the representatives of consumers, traders, and associations that the prevalence of such incidents on e-commerce platforms negatively affects the customer and as well as the overall business sentiment in the market. Domestic traders and producers in particular have complained about the unfair trade practices of some of the e-commerce platforms, which allegedly has deprived them a level playing field. So the government has taken note of these incidents, and hence, through a fresh set of amendments, it is looking to prohibit a certain category of flash sales or back-to-back sales. See, generally, e-commerce platforms, they come out with flash sales as a marketing technique to push their products. But certain e-commerce entities, they try to use this opportunity to limit the customer's choice by providing flash sales or back-to-back sales, wherein one seller who's selling on the platform, they do not carry any inventory or they do not have the capability to fulfill the order in the first place. They merely take the order and procure the product through another seller selling on the same platform. And they not only try to push up their profit margins, but they also try to prevent a level playing field for the competitors, that is the other sellers. And ultimately, it ends up limiting consumer choice, thereby leading to increase in prices as well. So such category of flash sales or back-to-back sales is proposed to be banned under the new amendments, whereas conventional flash sales by third-party sellers would be allowed to continue on the platform. See, to understand this further, you need to first understand how the government envisions the e-commerce sector to function. The government looks at the e-commerce sector as just a marketplace, as an online marketplace. The government looks at it as just an online platform which is linking the sellers with the buyers. So as per the government, these e-commerce platforms, the online websites, they should just provide a level playing field as an online marketplace where every seller can list their products and the consumer will have the choice to choose the products they want based on the quality and the pricing being offered by each seller. The government wants to ensure that e-commerce platforms are neutral, and the government doesn't want the e-commerce platforms to favor any particular seller, which could limit the consumer's choice. But the way e-commerce platforms operate is slightly different from what the government has envisioned. Most of the e-commerce platforms, including Flipkart, Amazon, and the others, they have all set up their own inventories. Basically, they themselves have become sellers on their own platforms and they try to undercut the other third party sellers because any day direct selling from the e-commerce company itself will fetch more profits to the company. So this is a case of a vested interest. The e-commerce platform always has a vested interest to promote its own inventory on its platform by providing attractive flash sales in order to limit the consumer choice. This is how the e-commerce business model has been built. This model has both advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage is that the third party sellers never get a level playing field on the platform because the e-commerce platform would always be favoring the products being sold by its own inventories. Through predatory pricing and through massive discounts, it will push only its products to the buyer, thereby limiting customers' choice. And this deprives the third party sellers a level playing field as they can't compete with the e-commerce companies. But on the other hand, this model is also advantageous for the overall economy because it is through this model that e-commerce companies have disrupted the traditional relationship between the buyer and the seller. So in India, the government has come out with rules that the e-commerce companies, they should just function as a marketplace and they themselves cannot have inventories. They should just provide a neutral level playing field for third party sellers where the consumer should be given complete choice. But in many instances, few e-commerce platforms have offered flash sales through their inventories for products they don't even possess or even while they don't have the capability to fulfill the order. Once they receive the order from the buyer through attractive discounts, later they place the order with other third party sellers, procure the same product, then sell it to the buyer at a higher price. So this practice is seen to be unfair to both the buyer and the third party sellers. Hence, the government is looking to intervene and ban these category of back-to-back flash sales. So to address all these issues, the government has proposed a fresh set of amendments to the e-commerce rules of 2020. And let's take a look at these important changes that have been proposed. First, in order to ensure compliance with the Consumer Protection Act of 2019 and its rules, the government is mandating e-commerce companies to appoint a chief compliance officer who would function as a nodal contact point so that all government agencies and law enforcement agencies will have 24/7 access to these companies in order to coordinate in case of any violation of laws or in case of failure of enforcement. As per the government, this measure would ensure effective compliance by the companies and it would also strengthen the grievance redressal mechanism on these platforms. Because when a consumer raises a complaint against an e-commerce platform, the law enforcement agencies would require a reliable point of contact to ensure that this grievance of the consumer is addressed. So for this purpose, it has been proposed that every e-commerce platform will have to appoint a chief compliance officer. Next, to ensure better enforcement and regulation, it has been proposed to make it mandatory for every e-commerce platform to be registered with the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. If implemented, every e-marketplace has to mandatorily register with the department and they would be allotted with a registration number. This registration number should be prominently displayed on the website and as well as on the bill or the invoice that they provide. As per the government, this would help in creating a database of genuine e-commerce entities, and it would also help the consumers to be able to verify the genuineness of these platforms. Then the proposed rules mandate the e-commerce entities to provide the expiry date of the products, that is the best before date or the use before date, to enable the consumers to make an informed choice. This provision has been proposed in order to protect the interests of the consumers, and it seeks to prohibit mis-selling, which is the selling of goods and services through deliberate misrepresentation of crucial information. This includes the expiry date of the product. Hence, the rules are proposing to mandate every e-commerce company to clearly display the expiry date of the products. Next, in order to protect the interests of the domestic manufacturers against imported goods and products, the amendments propose that e-commerce platforms should provide a fair and equal treatment to domestic manufacturers as well. This should be done by providing a filter mechanism on their platforms so that the buyers can identify goods based on the country of origin. And when a buyer is looking to purchase an imported product, the platform should suggest alternatives, that is, domestic alternatives, so that a fair opportunity is given to domestic producers as well. Then finally, if a seller fails to deliver the goods or services that have been promised, then the provision of fallback liability has been provided for against the e-commerce platforms. Essentially, the marketplaces would be held liable if the seller fails to deliver the promised goods or services. The stand of the government is that these proposed amendments are essential to protect the interests of the consumer and as well as to promote free and fair competition where third-party sellers enjoy a level playing field, along with promotion of domestic producers and domestic sellers. But however, the editorial argues that this appears to be a case of over-regulation from the government because this comes in the backdrop of the new IT regulation rules, which has already triggered a major controversy and it has placed the government in a conflict with several digital and online platforms. The latest IT rules, which seek to regulate social media firms, OTT platforms, digital platforms, etc., it has been facing criticism on the grounds that the government is seeking to over-regulate the online digital format. So the new proposed amendments to e-commerce sector is also being seen in the same light. And by seeking to impose excessive regulation, we might be witnessing a return to the era of tight controls or the license Raj era. The editorial points out that the proposed amendments contain a few ambiguous provisions and provides enormous powers to law enforcement agencies. And this ambiguity, which is open for interpretation and discretion, could always result in misuse and cases of overreach by the authorities, which could end up stifling growth and innovation in the e-commerce sector. The editorial fears that these proposed amendments will push e-commerce platforms into protracted legal battles with the government, thereby compromising its growth opportunities. In the last 1 decade, the e-commerce sector has transformed the Indian economy, and despite some of the drawbacks and concerns it has raised, it has definitely disrupted the traditional economy and it has helped in creating lakhs of jobs. The editorial points out that e-commerce companies are already facing several hurdles and legal challenges in the country, which is affecting their performance. Major companies like Flipkart and Amazon, they're already stuck with investigations being carried out by the Competition Commission of India against alleged malpractices of these companies. They have often been accused of preferential pricing towards select sellers, that is, towards their own inventories, by discriminating against third-party sellers. While this practice is disadvantageous to the traditional sellers, that is, the brick and mortar sellers, it does help in triggering competition and providing better choices for the consumer. But if misused, the e-commerce companies can establish monopolies, thereby wiping out domestic competition and limit the choices available to the consumer. In this regard, both risks and opportunities are present. But however, the attempt of the government to over-regulate the sector through ambiguous provisions is going to stifle growth in this key sector. Now let's take up another column from page number 6 that deals with the topic of misinformation. See, misinformation is nothing but the spreading of any false, inaccurate, and misleading messages and news. Examples include fake news, rumors, and as well as an attempt to intentionally deceive the readers or the target audience, and we refer to this as disinformation, which happens to be a subset of misinformation. See, all misinformation is not intentionally designed to deceive. Some of the fake news and rumors that circulate could be just false, inaccurate, and misleading, but they may not have a deliberate intention to deceive. But if this is created with a deliberate intention to deceive a target audience, then we refer to it as disinformation. Disinformation is a subset of misinformation. So the question is, who carries out such misinformation and disinformation campaigns? The answer is, it could be any vested interest who can benefit out of such misinformation and disinformation campaigns. For example, it could be state actors such as foreign governments and their hostile intelligence agencies, which are looking to target and subvert other countries. For example, Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI, is known to run such misinformation and disinformation campaigns targeted against India. For example, through false and misleading messages, law and order situation could be triggered in the country, or even a national security threat could be created. Such disinformation campaigns can be designed to instigate riots, to create mob violence, and to widen the communal divide or regional divides in the country. Then such misinformation and disinformation could be carried out by your own governments, ruling parties, and other political parties. They would do this for the purposes of propaganda in order to promote their political ideology and to target their opposition in order to win elections. Certain parties might try to exaggerate their achievements by planting misleading news and information in the media. Or they could use fake news and inaccurate and misleading reports to target their opposition. Even non state actors, such as private companies, could also resort to misinformation and disinformation for profit. They could target their rivals, their competitors, or they might try to push their product offerings through misleading advertisements. Then, of course, we have media, journalists, and activists who might also be engaging in misinformation and disinformation based on their ideological bias. They might be trying to favor certain political parties or certain companies, or they might even be trying to propagate certain political and religious ideologies. Then, of course, we have religious organizations, especially extremist organizations, which also make use of misinformation and disinformation. It is often used by radical right wing organizations, which are influenced by religious extremism. It could also be used by terrorist outfits to carry out their propaganda. It could also be used by left wing extremist organizations to promote their propaganda. Radical religious right wing organizations could carry out disinformation targeted against other religion. Left wing extremist outfits could carry out disinformation in order to engage in negative propaganda against the government. Or it could also be carried out by miscreants and criminals who are looking to make illegal profits or looking to disrupt law and order in the society. Today, the reach of misinformation and disinformation has increased significantly due to the staggering possibilities offered by social media platforms. On almost all social media platforms, you can come across such misinformation or disinformation campaigns. And today, the threat posed by it has increased further due to the employment of network propaganda by these vested interests. Today, we come across misinformation and disinformation campaigns which are very well organized, and they are often carried out through a network of influencers and amplifiers. In many cases, even well known personalities would be used for the purpose, including politicians, government leaders, celebrities, etc. We refer to such a well organized, orchestrated campaign of disinformation as network propaganda. The threats and impact of misinformation and disinformation ranges from threats to countries' national security, possible disruption to law and order, a direct impact on public interests and societal interests, and as well as a possible erosion of democratic and constitutional values. For example, look at how we witnessed an infodemic during the latest pandemic. A lot of false news and fake messages were circulating during the pandemic, which has been referred to as an infodemic. Many companies advertised false cures to the COVID 19 pandemic, and they even reaped enormous profits by promoting fake alternative medical therapies. In many cases, such subtle disinformation campaigns are encouraged by top leaders, well known personalities, celebrities, and social media influencers. Through disinformation, it's very much possible to widen the communal divide in the country and instigate riots. It's possible to push consumers to believe in fake cures and fake products, thereby affecting public interests and societal interests. It's possible to engineer elections and disrupt democratic elections, thereby threatening democratic and constitutional values. So, the writer of this column explores the alarming possibilities offered by disinformation and how, during the pandemic, we have witnessed an infodemic where several leaders and prominent institutions are seen to be promoting fake medical cures, which is in turn derailing our fight against the pandemic. Now, let's take up a few articles which are related to the ongoing developing situation in Afghanistan. See, in several sessions, we have discussed the US Taliban peace deal which was signed last year. As per the peace deal, the United States is withdrawing its troops from Afghanistan and it provides for intra Afghan talks involving the Taliban, the Afghan government, and other political representatives of Afghanistan to decide upon the political future of the country, including its state of democracy, along with the question of rights of minorities and women. And the deal also commits the Taliban to give up violence and to ensure that Afghan soil is not used for terrorism. Right now, the US has begun withdrawing its troops, and by September 11th this year, all American troops will be fully withdrawn from Afghanistan. This ongoing troop withdrawal, which began in the month of May, has emboldened the Taliban, and the Taliban has blatantly violated all its commitments under the peace deal. The promised intra Afghan talks have not really progressed, and as feared, the Taliban has already begun capturing power in Afghanistan. Just yesterday, it has been reported that the Taliban has gained complete control over 50 districts in Afghanistan out of its 370 districts. So now the neighboring countries of Afghanistan and other regional powers, they fear that Afghanistan might fall back under the control of the Taliban, just like it did back in 1996. In the context of this developing situation and increasing violence in Afghanistan, the UNSC had called for a meeting, and India, being a non-permanent member, took part in these consultations. India's foreign minister has observed during the meeting that the scale of violence has increased significantly in Afghanistan since the withdrawal of American troops began. India's foreign minister has pointed out to reports coming from the UN assistance mission in Afghanistan, which clearly shows an uptick in violence. And in the first quarter of 2021 alone, the scale of violence has increased by 29%. Most of the casualties of this violence are civilian casualties, and it is becoming increasingly clear that the Taliban is targeting minority communities, women, girl students who are attending schools, and as well as the Afghan security forces. In this context, India has called for a direct role for the UN to lead the intra-Afghan negotiations. And while India is supporting talks between Taliban and the Afghan government, and while it is also being reported that India might have opened direct talks with Taliban, the foreign minister has made it clear that India would like to see a direct role being given to the UN to lead these intra-Afghan talks. The foreign minister has also indirectly pointed out towards the disruptive activities of Pakistan by referring to the threat of terror safe havens and sanctuaries and the existence of cross-border terrorism along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. It's a well-known fact that the Taliban has deep connections with Pakistani intelligence agency, the ISI, and as well as other ISI-backed terror groups such as the Lashkar-e-Toiba, the Jaish-e-Mohammed, and even the Al-Qaeda. The fear of countries like India is that the Taliban might recapture Afghanistan completely throughout the civilian government and again turn Afghanistan into a fertile ground for terrorism. We had seen this happening back in 1996, and until the US invasion of 2001, the Taliban was seen to be nurturing a variety of terror groups on Afghan soil, and it had blatantly eroded democratic and fundamental rights. And by imposing a strict version of the radical Sharia law, the Taliban was seen to be targeting minorities and women. Now, these fears are making a comeback because Talibani forces are making advances against Afghan government and Afghan forces. And according to this article on page number 11, the Taliban have captured a very important border crossing point with Tajikistan. In the Kunduz province located over here along the Tajik border, Taliban has captured the Sher Khan port, which is a very important border crossing point, thereby extending Taliban's direct control over 50 districts of Afghanistan. Now, India, of course, is worried about the security situation of the region, and we are also worried about Indian investments in Afghanistan. Hence, the foreign minister has asked the UN, and as well as the global community led by the US, to ensure that access between Afghanistan and the Arabian Sea continues to remain uninterrupted, as India has invested heavily in developing this trade link between Afghanistan and the Chabahar port in Iran. Even the US ambassador to the United Nations has expressed concern about the developing situation and has informed the Taliban that there is no military solution to the Afghan situation. The US envoy has reiterated India's stand that any solution to Afghanistan should be Afghan led and Afghan owned, meaning the civilian government and the people of Afghanistan should determine the country's future. And if the Taliban were to violently capture power through open display of acts of terrorism, then it won't lead to international legitimacy, which the Taliban is seeking by making territorial gains in Afghanistan. Now let's take up an article from page number 11 that deals with the topic of cryptocurrencies. See, to understand the basic concept of cryptocurrency and understand what is it, how does it function, please go back and watch our analysis for the 13th of June, where I've covered these basic concepts and issues in detail. This article is related to the latest crash in prices of cryptocurrencies, which has happened over the last few days. The price of popular cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoin, has crashed by a significant margin in the last couple of days due to strict regulatory action being taken by China. See, China was not only a major hub for trading in cryptocurrencies, but China was also a major mining hub for cryptocurrencies. Most of the crypto mining companies were located in China, and recently Chinese authorities have started acting strictly against the mining firms and have even started prohibiting all crypto related transactions. The strict action of China against cryptocurrencies is designed to promote China's official digital currency, the digital yuan, and as well as to put an end to the uncertainties and concerns brought out by a decentralized currency such as cryptocurrencies. China has made it clear that it would like to have complete control over its monetary policy, which is possible only in case of centralized currencies such as fiat currencies. And to take advantage of digital currencies, China has launched its own digital yuan. But China is firmly opposed to any form of decentralized currency, and hence it has initiated strict action against crypto mining firms and as well as on crypto exchanges and trading platforms. And action is being taken even against its own citizens who are involved in crypto transactions. This strict regulatory action by China against cryptocurrencies has brought down the prices and led to a crash in the value of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, because China happened to be a major market for cryptocurrencies and as well as a major hub for crypto mining firms. Now let's look at this article from page number 8. According to the article, the liaison officer of the UK Navy has joined the Information Fusion Center of the Indian Navy, which is headquartered in Gurugram. See, the Information Fusion Center for the Indian Ocean region serves as the headquarters of India's Coastal Surveillance Radar project. This project was initiated by India following the 26/11 attacks, and the Indian Navy plays a lead role in this project. Under this project, India has set up a series of coastal surveillance radars along its coastline, including its island territories in Lakshadweep and the Andaman Nicobar Islands. Then under phase 2 of the project, we have extended the radar facilities to friendly countries in the IOR region, including Mauritius, Seychelles, and it has even been proposed to extend the radars to Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. These chain of radars, they help in tracking the movement of ships across the Indian Ocean region, thereby enhancing the maritime domain awareness of the Indian Navy. The project is also designed to counter China's growing naval presence in the Indian Ocean region. The data from all these radars is fed into the regional command centers of the Indian Navy, which finally gets integrated into the headquarters at Gurugram, which is known as the Information Fusion Center for the IOR region. At this facility of the Indian Navy, several friendly navies are posting their liaison officers to coordinate with the Indian Navy and to monitor the shipping traffic of the Indian Ocean. So under this initiative, friendly navies such as France, US, UK, Japan, and even Russia are posting their liaison officers at this headquarters to coordinate with the Indian Navy and to enhance their maritime domain awareness in the Indian Ocean region. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: critically evaluate the recently proposed amendments to the Consumer Protection E-commerce Rules of 2020. The second question: discuss the impact of misinformation spread by vested interests. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.